Delilah Harper clutched her infant daughter to her chest as the late April rain soaked through her threadbare shawl, the piercing words of her father still ringing in her ears. "No daughter of mine bears a child out of wedlock. You are dead to us now." Montana Territory, 1876, was unforgiving to women like her unmarried mothers with nowhere to turn and winter's chill barely retreated from the air. The small town of Pinecrest loomed ahead, its main street muddy from the spring rains. Delilah's arms ached from carrying little Rose for miles, but she pressed on, desperate for shelter before nightfall. Her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since yesterday's meager breakfast before her family cast her out. Shop owners eyed her suspiciously as she passed. A young woman, clearly unwed, with an infant, they knew her story without hearing a word. Doors seemed to close before she could reach them. Silent judgments passed with every step she took. "Please," she whispered to a woman sweeping the boardwalk outside a general store. "Is there somewhere I might find work? I can cook, clean, sew, anything." The woman's eyes softened momentarily before hardening again. "Not with that baby you won't. Not in this town." Desperation mounting, Delilah approached the town's only hotel. Perhaps they needed a maid. The proprietress took one look at Rose and shook her head before Delilah could even speak. By dusk, hope had abandoned her as thoroughly as her family had. The rain intensified, and Rose began to cry, hungry, cold, and wet. Delilah ducked under the overhang of what appeared to be a saloon, the Golden Spur, according to the weathered sign swinging in the wind. She hesitated. Decent women didn't enter such establishments, but her baby was hungry, and pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. With a deep breath, she pushed open the batwing doors. The raucous laughter inside died as she entered. Every eye turned to stare at the soaking wet woman clutching a wailing infant. The piano player's fingers froze over the keys, and the bartender stopped mid-pour. "You're in the wrong place, miss," the bartender called out. "We don't serve your kind here." Delilah stood taller, though her legs threatened to buckle beneath her. "My kind? You mean mothers?" A few men chuckled, but most looked away uncomfortably. She knew what they thought, that she was ruined, fallen, a woman of loose morals. "Please," she said, her voice wavering. "My baby needs food, I need work. Anything." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Rose's persistent cries. From the corner of the room, a man rose from his seat. Tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially hidden beneath the brim of a worn Stetson. He crossed the room with purposeful strides, spurs jingling with each step. "Barkeep," his deep voice rumbled, "bring this lady something to eat." He gestured to his table in the corner. "Madam, would you care to join me?" Whispers rippled through the saloon. Delilah recognized him now, Blake Morgan, one of the most successful cattle ranchers in the territory. She'd seen him in town occasionally, during her previous life as a respectable merchant's daughter. I cannot pay you back," she admitted, shame coloring her cheeks. "I'm not asking for payment," he replied simply. "Just offering a meal to someone who needs it." Delilah hesitated, weighing her options. There weren't many. With a slight nod, she followed him to his table, aware of the judgment radiating from the other patrons. As she sat, Rose's cries subsided to whimpers. The baby seemed to sense the change in their circumstances, however temporary it might be. "Blake Morgan," he introduced himself, removing his hat to reveal tousled dark hair and kind blue eyes. "Delilah Harper," she replied softly. "And this is Rose. Pleased to meet you both, Miss Harper." His eyes held no judgment, only a quiet compassion that made her throat tighten with unshed tears. The bartender approached, setting down a plate of stew, bread, and a cup of milk. Blake nodded his thanks and pushed the food toward Delilah. "Eat," he encouraged. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days." She wanted to maintain her dignity, to eat slowly and properly as she'd been raised to do. But hunger won out, and she devoured the stew while Blake held Rose awkwardly but willingly. "You're good with her," Delilah observed, surprised at how comfortably Rose settled in the rancher's large hands. "Had some practice with my sister's young uns," he replied, smiling down at the baby. "Been a while, though." When she finished eating, Delilah took Rose back, feeling stronger with food in her stomach. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Your kindness won't be forgotten." "Where are you staying tonight?" he asked, his brow furrowed. The question brought her momentary strength crashing down. I don't know. I just arrived in town today. And no one would take you in." His jaw tightened, though his anger clearly wasn't directed at her. "Not with Rose," she answered, the bitter truth painful to admit. Blake was quiet for a long moment, deliberating. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Harper." "It's not charity," he added quickly, noticing her expression. "It's a job offer, a job offer." Hope flickered dangerously in her chest. "My housekeeper left last month to care for her ailing mother in Kansas. I've been managing, but barely." He smiled ruefully. "Ranch house is a mess, and I'm a terrible cook. I need help, and you need work and a roof over your heads." Delilah studied his face, looking for ulterior motives. "Mr. Morgan, I appreciate the offer, but I must be clear I won't. That is, I'm not." "Miss Harper," he interrupted gently, "I'm offering you a position as my housekeeper, nothing more. You'll have your own quarters. The old housekeeper's room has space enough for a cradle." He met her eyes directly. "I respect women, Miss Harper. All women. My mother raised me right." Relief washed over her, followed by gratitude so intense it threatened to unravel her completely. "When would you like me to start?" "Tonight, if you're willing. My wagon's outside." 20 minutes later, Delilah found herself beside Blake on his wagon seat, Rose bundled against the rain, heading toward the Morgan Ranch 5 miles outside of town. The rain had eased to a gentle patter, and the evening air smelled of wet earth and pine. "What happened to your family?" Blake asked quietly, his eyes on the road ahead. Delilah stiffened. "They made their feelings clear about my situation." He nodded, not pressing further. "Well, you have a job now, and a place to stay for as long as you need it." They traveled in silence for a while, until the outline of a large ranch house appeared through the mist. Lamplight glowed from the windows, and smoke curled from the chimney. "Diego, my foreman, must have lit the fires," Blake explained. "He lives in the bunkhouse with the other hands, but looks after things when I'm in town." The ranch house was impressive, 2 stories of solid construction with a wide porch wrapping around the front. It spoke of success and permanence, qualities Delilah had thought forever lost to her. Blake helped her down from the wagon and carried her small bundle of possessions inside. The interior was exactly as he described a bachelor's home in desperate need of a woman's touch. Dishes were piled in the sink, books and papers scattered across tables, and a layer of dust covered nearly every surface. Despite the disarray, it was warm and solid. A sanctuary. "It's not much to look at right now," Blake said apologetically. "It's perfect," Delilah replied truthfully. "I'll have it set to rights in no time." He showed her to the housekeeper's quarters, a snug room off the kitchen with its own small fireplace and a window overlooking the garden. "I'll bring in some wood to start your fire," he offered. "There's a cradle in the attic. I'll fetch it down tomorrow." "Mr. Morgan," Delilah called as he turned to leave. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me." Blake paused in the doorway. "My ma always said to judge people by their character, not their circumstances. You've got courage, Miss Harper." Not many women would walk into that saloon with their head held high. His smile was gentle. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's a new day." After he left, Delilah laid Rose on the bed beside her and stared at the ceiling, trying to process the dramatic change in her fortunes. Yesterday, she'd been a respected daughter in a merchant's home. This morning, she'd been homeless and desperate. Tonight, she had shelter, employment, and an unexpected ally. For the first time since discovering she was with child, Delilah allowed herself to hope that perhaps, just perhaps, the future might hold something more than shame and struggle. As spring warmed into summer, Delilah settled into life at the Morgan Ranch. The house transformed under her care, becoming the home it was meant to be: clean, organized, and filled with the sense of home-cooked meals. Blake ate her cooking with such appreciation that she found herself experimenting with recipes, taking pride in her work in a way she hadn't expected. Rose thrived in the fresh country air. Blake had kept his word, bringing down not only a cradle but also commissioning the ranch carpenter to build a small rocking chair for Delilah's room. These thoughtful gestures, offered without fanfare or expectation, touched her deeply. Blake himself was a puzzle she was slowly piecing together. 32 years old, he'd built his ranch from almost nothing after returning from the war with little more than determination and grit. The ranch hands respected him, and even in town, where gossip about her situation followed her like a shadow, no one dared speak ill of Blake Morgan to his face. He kept a respectful distance, never intruding on her privacy, yet he showed kindness in 100 small ways, bringing wildflowers for her table, carrying water for her laundry, sitting with Rose when Delilah needed both hands free for baking or preserving. June brought the cattle drive, taking Blake and most of the hands away for 3 weeks. The house felt emptier without his presence, and Delilah was surprised by how much she missed their quiet conversations over evening meals. When he returned, sunburned and trail-weary, she had prepared his favorite meal: beef stew with dumplings and apple pie for dessert. "This is heaven," he declared, devouring his second helping. "I've been dreaming about your cooking for 3 weeks. Just the cooking." She teased, surprising herself with the flirtatious tone. His eyes met hers, serious despite his smile. "No, not just the cooking." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Delilah looked away first, suddenly uncertain. Her heart wasn't ready, might never be ready after what happened with Rose's father. "She's growing so fast," Blake observed, watching Rose play on a blanket near the fireplace. At nearly 6 months, she was beginning to sit up on her own, reaching for toys with determined little hands. "Too fast," Delilah agreed, grateful for the change in subject. "Soon she'll be crawling everywhere." "We should put up some gates," Blake suggested. "I could build them next Sunday." The casual "we" wasn't lost on Delilah. Somehow they had become a unit of sorts, not quite a family, but something more than employer and employee. That night, after Rose was asleep, Delilah sat on the porch enjoying the cool evening air. Blake joined her, offering a cup of coffee. "Thank you," she said, accepting the steaming mug. "For everything." He settled into the chair beside her. "I've been meaning to ask you something." Her heart quickened. "Yes. Would you consider taking on more responsibilities around the ranch? Not just housekeeping, but helping with the books, correspondence, that sort of thing." "I'd increase your wages, of course." It wasn't what she'd expected, but the opportunity to use her education, one of the few gifts her father had given her, appealed strongly. "I'd like that very much." "Good." He seemed relieved. "Truth is, I never had much schooling. Can read and cipher well enough to get by, but business letters take me forever to write." "I can help with that," she assured him. "I had excellent teachers." "I figured as much. You speak like someone who's read a lot of books." Delilah smiled. "My father believed in education, even for daughters. It was perhaps his one progressive quality." Blake was quiet for a moment, You never talk about him or your mother. No, she agreed softly. Some wounds are still too fresh. Was he, Rose's father? No. The vehemence in her voice surprised them both. No, she repeated more calmly. Rose's father was passing through town, a salesman with fine manners and empty promises. She stared into her coffee. I was foolish and trusting. By the time I realized I was with child, he was long gone. Blake's hand covered hers briefly. His loss, he said simply. The summer passed in a pleasant rhythm. Delilah took over the ranch's correspondence and bookkeeping, discovering a talent for business that complemented Blake's practical knowledge of ranching. Their partnership grew stronger, built on mutual respect and shared goals. Rose began crawling, then pulling herself up on furniture, filling the house with baby babbles and delighted squeals. Blake built her a small corral of sorts in the main room, a safe space where she could play while Delilah worked. Often, Delilah would look up from her ledgers to find Blake sitting on the floor with Rose, playing peek-a-boo or building block towers for her to knock down. The tenderness with which this powerful man interacted with her daughter never failed to touch her heart. One evening in late August, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Blake cleared his throat nervously. I've been thinking, Delilah. It had taken months for him to use her given name, and she still loved the way it sounded in his deep voice. The Harvest Festival is coming up next month. Yes, I've been planning what preserves to enter in the competition, she replied, wondering at his unusual hesitation. I was wondering if you might like to attend, with me. He rushed on before she could respond. Not as my housekeeper, but as my guest, as my... He faltered. As your what, Blake? She asked softly, her heart pounding. He met her eyes directly. As the woman I'm courting, if you'd allow it. The world seemed to still around them. You want to court me, knowing my situation, my past. I know who you are now, he said firmly. A loving mother. A skilled housekeeper. A sharp businesswoman. A kind-hearted, beautiful woman who deserves to be treated with respect. He took her hand. I've grown to care for you deeply, Delilah, and for Rose. If you don't feel the same, I'll understand, and nothing needs to change with your position here. Tears blurred her vision. Blake Morgan, you are the finest man I've ever known. I would be honored to be courted by you. His smile was like the sunrise, brilliant and full of promise. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Thank you, he whispered. The Harvest Festival transformed Pinecrest's Main Street into a celebration of the season's bounty. Delilah wore her best dress, one she'd sewn herself from fabric Blake had brought back from his last trip to Helena. Rose, dressed in a matching pinafore, babbled happily in Blake's arms as they walked among the stalls and displays. Whispers followed them, but Delilah held her head high. Let them talk. Blake's hand at the small of her back gave her courage. Her preserves won first prize strawberry jam that Blake declared was worth its weight in gold. His pride in her accomplishment was evident to everyone watching as he beamed while she accepted the blue ribbon. I knew you'd win, he said, squeezing her hand. Only because you built that strawberry bed for me in the spring, she replied, squeezing back. They were interrupted by Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife and one of the town's most influential matrons. Miss Harper, she said coolly, your jam was adequate. Delilah stiffened. Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. Adequate. Blake's voice carried just enough edge to make the older woman step back slightly. It was exceptional. The judges clearly agreed. Yes, well, Mrs. Peterson sniffed. I'm surprised to see you here, Miss Harper, with your situation. Before Delilah could respond, Blake stepped forward. Mrs. Peterson, I'd like to make something very clear. Miss Harper is under my protection and has my highest respect. Anyone who treats her with less than the courtesy she deserves will answer to me." His tone was pleasant, but the steel beneath was unmistakable. Mrs. Peterson's eyes widened. "Mr. Morgan, surely you understand that's certain. Moral standards must be maintained in our community." "I understand that compassion and kindness are the only moral standards worth upholding," he replied firmly. "Good day, Mrs. Peterson." He guided Delilah away, his hand steady at her back. When they were out of earshot, she leaned into him slightly. "Thank you for defending me." "Always," he promised, "though you're perfectly capable of defending yourself. It means more coming from you. They respect you." "They should respect you too," he said fiercely. "You're the strongest person I know." As twilight fell, lanterns were lit around the town square and fiddle music filled the air. Blake handed Rose to Diego's wife, Maria, who had agreed to watch her for a while. "May I have this dance?" he asked, extending his hand to Delilah. She hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "I'd like that very much." He led her to the makeshift dance floor, pulling her gently into his arms. They moved together to the lively tune, her skirts swirling around them. Delilah was acutely aware of every place their bodies touched, his hand at her waist, her palm against his shoulder, their fingers intertwined. "People are staring," she murmured. "Let them," he replied, his eyes never leaving her face. "They're just jealous. I'm dancing with the prettiest woman here." She laughed, a free, joyful sound that turned a few more heads. "You're quite the charmer, Mr. Morgan. Only with you, Miss Harper." As the music slowed to a waltz, he drew her closer. Delilah rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. For the first time since she discovered she was carrying Rose, she felt truly safe. "Delilah," Blake's voice rumbled through his chest, "I think I'm falling in love with you." She looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt or hesitation. There was none, only tenderness and hope. "I think I fell in love with you the moment you offered me a seat at your table," she admitted. "I just didn't trust it, didn't trust myself. And now?" he asked, his arms tightening slightly around her waist. "Now I trust you with my life, with Rose's life." She touched his cheek gently. "With my heart." The kiss, when it came, was gentle and questioning, a request rather than a demand. Delilah answered by rising on her toes to press more firmly against his lips, her arms sliding around his neck. The world around them faded, the music, the stares, the whispers, until there was only Blake and the promise of his embrace. When they parted, his smile was tender. "I've wanted to do that for months." "Why didn't you?" she asked, breathless. "I needed you to be sure, to know that you were choosing me, not just security." "I choose you," she whispered. "I choose us." They collected Rose from Maria and headed back to the ranch under a sky brilliant with stars. Rose fell asleep on the journey, nestled securely between them on the wagon seat. "What happens now?" Delilah asked as the ranch house came into view, its windows dark and welcoming. Blake took her hand. "Now we build a life together, if that's what you want. Not as housekeeper and employer, but as equals, partners." "I'd like that," she replied, her heart full. "Very much." As autumn painted the surrounding hills in shades of gold and crimson, Blake and Delilah's courtship blossomed. He brought her wildflowers and books from his trips to town. She baked his favorite treats and mended his shirts with careful stitches. They shared long conversations by the fire after Rose was asleep, learning each other's stories, dreams, and fears. Blake spoke of his time in the war, the nightmares that still occasionally haunted him, and his determination to build something lasting and good from the ashes of that conflict. Delilah shared memories of her childhood, her love of learning, and her hopes for Rose's future. Their first disagreement came in October when Blake suggested hiring additional help for the house. You're taking on too much, he insisted over breakfast. The ranch books, the housekeeping, caring for Rose, it's too much for one person. I'm managing fine, Delilah countered, pride stiffening her spine. I don't need help. It's not about need, it's about what's reasonable. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I don't want you working yourself to exhaustion. Is my work unsatisfactory? She challenged. Of course not. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about, Blake? He reached across the table to take her hand. It's about me caring for you and wanting you to have time for yourself, for us, for Rose. The simple honesty of his words deflated her anger. I'm not used to someone looking out for me, she admitted. It's been just me and Rose for so long. Not anymore, he reminded her gently. Will you at least consider it? Maybe someone to help with laundry and the heavier cleaning, she nodded slowly. I'll think about it. A week later, Maria's niece, Lucia, joined the household staff, coming 3 days a week to help with the more laborious tasks. The arrangement proved beneficial for everyone. Lucia earned good wages. Delilah had more time for Rose and for herself, and Blake had the satisfaction of seeing Delilah less exhausted at day's end. With the additional help, Delilah found time to pursue interests beyond her duties. She started a small vegetable garden, began teaching Rose simple words and songs, and even resumed her own reading, borrowing books from Blake's surprisingly extensive library. One crisp November afternoon, Blake found her in the study, absorbed in a volume of Emerson's essays. There you are, he said, smiling at the picture she made, curled in his leather chair with the book on her lap. I've been looking for you. Sorry, she replied, marking her place. I got caught up in reading. Don't apologize. I love seeing you enjoy yourself. He held out his hand. But I have something to show you, if you're willing to tear yourself away from Mr. Emerson for a while. Curious, she took his hand and followed him outside. Rose was napping under Lucia's watchful eye, so they had a rare moment alone together. Blake led her to the barn where his prize stallion Thunder was saddled and waiting. I thought we might go for a ride. There's a place I want to show you. Delilah hesitated. I haven't ridden in years, not since before Rose. You'll ride with me, he assured her. Thunder can easily carry us both. With his help, she settled in front of him on the saddle, his arms encircling her as he took the reins. The intimacy of the position made her pulse quicken, but she felt secure within the circle of his embrace. They rode away from the ranch, following a narrow trail that wound through stands of aspen trees, their golden leaves shimmering in the afternoon light. Blake guided Thunder up a gentle slope, emerging onto a small plateau overlooking a valley that stretched to the distant mountains. It's breathtaking, Delilah gasped, taking in the panoramic view. Blake dismounted and helped her down, keeping his hands at her waist a moment longer than necessary. I come here to think sometimes. It helps put things in perspective. They stood together at the edge of the plateau, the vastness of Montana spread before them. Blake's arm slipped around her waist, and she leaned into him, savoring his warmth against the November chill. I brought you here for a reason, he said after a comfortable silence. This land, all of it, as far as you can see, it's what I've worked for my entire adult life. You've accomplished so much, she said, genuinely impressed. You should be proud. I was, he agreed. Until recently, this ranch was everything to me, my whole purpose. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. But now I realize it's just land, just buildings and cattle. It doesn't mean anything without someone to share it with. Delilah's heart began to race. Blake. He dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hands. Delilah Harper, these past months with you and Rose have been the happiest of my life. You've brought light and purpose into my home and my heart. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I'm asking you to be my wife, to make our family official, to build a future together on this land." He opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "Will you marry me?" Tears blurred her vision as she looked down at this strong, kind man who had changed her life in so many ways. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Blake Morgan, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand alone. He rose and gathered her in his arms, kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. "It was my grandmother's," he explained when they finally broke apart, nodding toward the ring. "My mother gave it to me before she passed, said to save it for the woman who captured my heart completely." "It's beautiful," Delilah said, admiring how the pearl caught the light. "I'll treasure it always." They stood together on the plateau, planning their future, dreaming aloud of the life they would build together. Blake wanted to adopt Rose legally, giving her his name and all the rights of a legitimate child. Delilah spoke of expanding the vegetable garden into a proper kitchen farm, maybe adding chickens and dairy cows to make the ranch more self-sufficient. "We'll be married at Christmas," Blake decided as they rode back to the ranch. Delilah once again nestled against his chest. "If that's not too soon for you, it's perfect," she assured him. "I don't want to wait any longer than necessary." News of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch and into town. Most of the hands offered hearty congratulations, genuinely happy for their boss and the woman who had transformed the ranch house into a true home. In Pinecrest, reactions were more mixed. Some, like the preacher and his wife, expressed genuine pleasure at the match. Others, led by Mrs. Peterson and her circle, whispered behind their hands about Blake making an honest woman of his fallen housekeeper. Blake ignored the gossip, proudly escorting Delilah and Rose to church each Sunday, his hand possessively at the small of her back. When someone was bold enough to make a direct comment, he met it with calm dignity that made the speaker seem small and petty in comparison. "Don't let them spoil this time for you," he told Delilah after a particularly difficult encounter at the general store. "They don't matter. We do. Our family does." Their wedding plans were simple but elegant. The ceremony would take place at the ranch on Christmas Eve, followed by a celebration for friends, ranch hands, and those townspeople who had shown them kindness. Delilah worked on a special dress, ivory silk ordered from Helena, while Blake arranged for a proper cradle to be built for Rose, who would move into their room after the wedding. 2 weeks before Christmas, as Delilah was putting the finishing touches on her wedding dress, a knock came at the front door. She set aside her sewing and went to answer it, expecting perhaps a delivery from town. Instead, she found herself face to face with her father. Daniel Harper stood on the porch, his tall frame stooped with age in a way she didn't remember. His stern face was lined with new wrinkles, his beard more gray than brown. "Father," she gasped, one hand flying to her throat. "Delilah," he acknowledged stiffly. "May I come in?" She stepped back automatically, years of obedience overriding her shock. "Of course." He entered, removing his hat, his eyes sweeping critically over the home she had created with Blake. "So, this is where you've been hiding." "I haven't been hiding," she replied, finding her voice. "I've been living, working, raising my daughter." At the mention of Rose, his expression hardened. "Yes, the child. Her name is Rose," Delilah said firmly. "Your granddaughter." They stood awkwardly in the entryway, years of hurt and disappointment stretching between them like a chasm. "Why are you here, Father?" she finally asked. He shifted uncomfortably. "Your mother is unwell. She asks for you." Concern pierced through Delilah's protective anger. "How unwell?" The doctor doesn't give her long consumption. His voice cracked slightly on the word. She wants to see you. And the child. Before. Delilah closed her eyes briefly, memories of her gentle mother washing over her. Despite her father's dominance, Delilah Harper had always shown Delilah quiet love in the small ways she could. "I'll need to speak with Blake," she said after a moment. "My fiancé." Something like surprise flickered across her father's face. "Fiancé, the rancher." "Yes, Blake Morgan. We're to be married at Christmas." Her father nodded slowly. "I've heard of him. Respectable man, good business sense." He cleared his throat. "He knows about Rose." "Of course, he loves her as his own." She couldn't keep the pride from her voice. "He's a good man, father, the best I've ever known." Before he could respond, the door opened behind him and Blake himself entered, stopping short at the scene before him. Delilah. His eyes moved between her and the older man, concern evident in his expression. "Blake, this is my father, Daniel Harper," she said, her voice remarkably steady. "Father, this is Blake Morgan, my fiancé." The two men sized each other up, decades of different experiences reflected in their eyes. Blake moved to stand beside Delilah, his presence solid and reassuring. "Mr. Harper," he said, extending his hand, "I've heard about you." After a brief hesitation, Daniel took the offered hand. "Morgan, I understand you intend to marry my daughter." "I do," Blake confirmed, his voice brooking no argument. "With or without your blessing, though I'd prefer with." Daniel's eyebrows rose at the direct approach. "You know her situation." "I know she's the most remarkable woman I've ever met," Blake replied evenly. "I know she's an excellent mother, a skilled housekeeper, and sharp as a tack with business matters. I know she makes me happier than I ever thought possible." His eyes never wavered from the older man's face. "That's her situation as I see it." Delilah's heart swelled with love for this man who defended her so fiercely yet so calmly. Her father seemed taken aback by Blake's unwavering support. "I see." He turned back to Delilah. "Your mother is asking for you. Will you come?" Delilah looked to Blake, who nodded slightly. "Of course I'll come," she said. "For Mother, when? As soon as possible, today if you can. I'll need to pack some things for Rose and myself." She glanced at Blake again. "Will you come with us?" "Of course," he replied immediately. "I'll have Diego ready the wagon." While Blake went to make arrangements, Delilah led her father to the parlor. "Please sit. Would you like some coffee?" He settled stiffly into a chair. "No, thank you." An awkward silence fell between them until Rose's babbling drifted down from upstairs where Lucia was watching her. "Is that?" Daniel asked, his eyes lifting toward the ceiling. "Yes. Would you like to meet her?" He hesitated, then nodded once. Delilah went upstairs and returned moments later with Rose in her arms. At 14 months, she was a sturdy, cheerful baby with Delilah's blue eyes and fair hair. "Father, this is Rose," she said softly. "Rose, this is your grandfather." Daniel Harper studied the child with an unreadable expression. Rose, always friendly, reached out a pudgy hand toward him, babbling happily. "She has your mother's smile," he said gruffly, not taking the offered hand but not recoiling either. "And your eyes." "Yes," Delilah agreed, surprised by this observation. "I've always thought so." The journey to Delilah's childhood home was tense but peaceful. Blake drove the wagon, with Delilah beside him holding Rose. Daniel followed on his own horse, maintaining a slight distance that seemed symbolic of the emotional gap still between them. Pinecrest was only 20 miles from the Harper farm, but it felt like crossing into another world for Delilah. As they approached the familiar farmhouse, memories flooded back, some sweet, some painful, all part of what had shaped her into the woman she was now. Delilah Harper lay in the bedroom she had shared with Daniel for 30 years, her once robust frame withered by illness. When Delilah entered with Rose in her arms, tears immediately filled the older woman's eyes. "My girl," she whispered, her voice thin and reedy. "You came." "Of course I came, Mother," Delilah said, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "How could I stay away?" Eleanor's trembling hand reached for Rose. "And this is my granddaughter." "Yes, this is Rose." Delilah helped position the baby where her mother could see her better. "Rose, this is your grandmother." Rose, sensing the solemnity of the moment, was unusually quiet, studying the frail woman with curious eyes. "She's beautiful," Eleanor murmured. "Perfect." Her gaze shifted to Delilah. "I'm sorry, my darling girl. So sorry I didn't stand up for you, that I let him send you away." "It's all right, Mother," Delilah soothed, though the pain of that rejection would never fully heal. "I've found happiness. I'm engaged to be married to a wonderful man." Eleanor's face brightened slightly. "Tell me about him." For the next hour, Delilah sat with her mother, sharing stories of Blake, the ranch, and her new life. Eleanor listened avidly, asking questions when she had the strength, her eyes never leaving her daughter's face or her granddaughter's. When Rose began to fuss, Delilah took her downstairs where Blake waited in the kitchen. Daniel sat across from him, the two men having apparently reached some sort of uneasy truce in her absence. "How is she?" Blake asked, rising to take Rose from her arms. "Tired now," Delilah replied. "But happy, I think. To see us." That night, Blake returned to the ranch to tend to necessary business, promising to return the next day. Delilah stayed in her old bedroom, now stripped of most personal touches but still hauntingly familiar. Rose slept beside her in a makeshift crib her father had arranged, a gesture that spoke volumes about his conflicted feelings. For 3 days, Delilah divided her time between caring for Rose and sitting with her mother, whose strength ebbed visibly with each passing hour. They spoke of the past, of missed opportunities and regrets, but also of hope for the future. Eleanor blessed Delilah's upcoming marriage and extracted a promise that she would name her next daughter Eleanor. "There will be more children," she predicted with a weak smile. "I can see how much your Blake loves you. He'll give you a houseful." On the 4th day, as snow began to fall outside the farmhouse windows, Delilah Harper slipped away peacefully in her sleep, Delilah's hand clasped in hers. The funeral was held 2 days later, a simple service attended by neighbors and friends from the surrounding farms. Blake stood steadfastly beside Delilah, his arm around her waist providing silent support as she grieved. After the last mourners had departed, leaving only family in the quiet farmhouse, Daniel Harper approached Delilah and Blake as they prepared to return to the ranch. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice gruff with emotion he rarely showed, "about what your mother would want. What's right?" Delilah waited, expecting perhaps a formal blessing for their marriage or at most an invitation to visit occasionally. "I'd like to come to your wedding," he said instead. "If you'll have me." Tears sprang to Delilah's eyes. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a beginning. "We'd be honored, Father." Daniel nodded, then surprised her further by awkwardly patting Rose's head where she sat in Blake's arms. "She's a Harper, all right, got the stubborn chin." Blake laughed softly. "That she does. Gets it from her mother." A ghost of a smile touched Daniel's lips. "Her mother got it from me." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, Delilah lost in thoughts of her mother, her father, and the complicated love that had defined her childhood home. Blake gave her the space to process her grief, simply being present without demanding conversation. When they arrived home, and it was truly home now, he helped her down from the wagon, keeping an arm around her as they walked to the house. "Are you all right?" he asked softly as they reached the porch. "I will be," she replied honestly. "It hurts, but I'm grateful we had those days together at the end, that she got to meet Rose, that there was some peace between us. And your father, she considered the question carefully. I don't know if we'll ever fully heal what was broken, but him coming to the wedding. It's more than I ever expected. Blake nodded. People can surprise you, sometimes in good ways. Like a rancher offering a seat at his table to a desperate woman and her baby, she asked with a small smile. He pulled her closer. Like a brave woman accepting that seat and changing my life forever. The days leading up to Christmas were filled with wedding preparations and the usual ranch activities. Delilah found comfort in routine after the emotional turmoil of her mother's passing. Blake gave her space to grieve while ensuring she knew he was there whenever she needed him. Rose seemed to sense her mother's sadness, offering extra cuddles and sloppy kisses that never failed to bring a smile to Delilah's face. The toddler was walking more confidently now, exploring her world with endless curiosity and bringing joy to everyone at the ranch. Christmas Eve dawned clear and cold, the winter sun casting long blue shadows across the fresh snow that blanketed the ranch. Delilah stood at her bedroom window, watching the preparations below as ranch hands strung evergreen boughs and lanterns around the yard where the celebration would take place after the ceremony. A knock at her door preceded Lucia's entrance, carrying a breakfast tray. "Mr. Morgan says to eat something, even if you're nervous," the young woman reported with a smile, "and to tell you he can't wait to make you his wife." Delilah felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Thank you, Lucia. Is Rose awake yet?" Maria has her. "They're making flower crowns from the hothouse blooms Mr. Morgan brought from Helena." After breakfast, Delilah bathed in water scented with lavender oil, another gift from Blake, and began the process of dressing for her wedding. The ivory silk gown she had sewn was simple but elegant, with tiny pearl buttons down the back and delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. As she was struggling with the buttons, another knock came at her door. "Come in, Lucia. I need help with these buttons," she called. The door opened, but it wasn't Lucia who entered. It was her father. "Father," Delilah quickly gathered the bodice of her dress to her chest. "I wasn't expecting you yet. I came early, thought you might need," he gestured vaguely, "help or something." "Actually, I do." She turned, presenting her back with its row of tiny buttons. "If you don't mind." His fingers were surprisingly deft as he fastened each button, a skill he must have acquired during his long marriage to her mother. When he finished, she turned to face him again. "You look beautiful," he said quietly, "like your mother on our wedding day." The unexpected compliment brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you." Daniel reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I brought something. It was hers. She would want you to have it today." Delilah opened the pouch to find a delicate silver hairpin topped with a small pearl flower. "Mother's favorite," she whispered, remembering how Alina had worn it for special occasions. "Let me," her father said, taking the pin and carefully securing a strand of her hair with it. The simple act of tenderness from this stern man nearly undid her composure completely. "Thank you, father," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. He nodded, then reached into his coat pocket again. "One more thing." He withdrew an envelope. "This is the deed to 20 acres on the north side of my property. It borders Morgan's ranch. Wedding present." Delilah stared at the envelope in shock. "Father, I can't accept." "You can and you will," he interrupted. "It's your inheritance. Would have been yours anyway someday. Might as well have it now when it can do some good." He pressed the envelope into her hands. "Land is the only thing that lasts, Delilah. Now you and Morgan will have more of it to pass on to Rose and whatever other children come along." Understanding dawned. This was his way of acknowledging Rose as his legitimate grandchild, of ensuring her future. It was as close to a full reconciliation as Daniel Harper could manage. "Thank you," she said simply, accepting the gift for what it was: an olive branch, a blessing, a promise for the future. When he left to join the gathering guests downstairs, Lucia arrived to help with Delilah's hair and to bring Rose, resplendent in a new white dress with a crown of hothouse flowers atop her golden curls. "Pretty mama," Rose declared, patting Delilah's gown with admiring hands. "Careful of the silk, little one," Lucia cautioned, deftly intercepting potentially sticky fingers. "It's all right," Delilah laughed. "Nothing could spoil this day." At 4 o'clock, as the winter sun began its early descent, Diego knocked on the door. "It's time, Miss Delilah," he announced. "Everyone is ready." With Rose in Lucia's arms and her small bouquet of winter roses clutched in suddenly trembling hands, Delilah descended the stairs. At the bottom, her father waited to escort her through the house and out to the decorated yard where Blake and their guests awaited. "Ready?" Daniel asked gruffly, offering his arm. "I've been ready since the day I met him," she replied with complete honesty. The ranch yard had been transformed. Lanterns hung from trees and fence posts, casting a golden glow over the gathered crowd. Evergreen boughs and red ribbons decorated a simple arch where the preacher and Blake stood waiting. Despite the December chill, warmth radiated from the assembled community ranch hands and their families, friendly townspeople, and even a few of the neighboring ranchers who had come to respect Blake's enterprise. And there was Blake himself, standing tall and handsome in a new black suit, his eyes finding hers immediately as she appeared on her father's arm. The love and admiration in his gaze warmed her more effectively than any fire could have. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows, their voices clear and certain in the winter air. When Blake slipped a gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady and sure. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared. "Mr. Morgan, you may kiss your bride." Blake's kiss was tender yet possessive, a promise of the life they would share. When they turned to face their guests as Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, Rose squirmed from Lucia's arms and toddled toward them, arms outstretched. Blake scooped her up, settling her comfortably between them. "And I have a special promise for you too, little one," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "I promise to be the best father I can be, to love and protect you always, and to make sure you never doubt for a moment that you belong exactly where you are with us." There wasn't a dry eye in the gathering as Blake sealed this promise with a kiss on Rose's forehead. The celebration that followed was joyous and relaxed. Tables laden with food prepared by Maria, Lucia, and friends from neighboring ranches lined one side of the yard. A small group of musicians played lively tunes that soon had people dancing despite the cold. As twilight deepened into night, more lanterns were lit, and blankets appeared for those who needed extra warmth. Blake and Delilah moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes with gracious thanks. Mrs. Peterson made a brief appearance, her curiosity apparently overcoming her disapproval. She approached Delilah with a tight smile. "A lovely ceremony, Mrs. Morgan. Rather unconventional, but lovely." Before Delilah could respond, Blake's arm slid around her waist. "We're rather fond of unconventional, Mrs. Peterson. It's brought us more happiness than convention ever could." The older woman's lips pursed, but she offered no rebuttal. After a moment of awkward silence, she excused herself and departed shortly thereafter. "Good riddance," Blake murmured into Delilah's ear, making her laugh. As the evening progressed, Daniel Harper approached them, looking somewhat out of place among the merrymakers but determined nonetheless. "Morgan," he acknowledged with a nod. "I gave Delilah the deed to the north 20 acres. It borders your property." Blake's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's very generous, sir." It's her inheritance, Daniel replied with a shrug. Figured you two could make good use of it now. We will, Blake assured him. Thank you. Daniel hesitated, then added gruffly, there's water on that parcel, good spring, never runs dry, even in August. Blake recognized the olive branch for what it was. Perhaps you'd ride out with me sometime, show me where it is. Something almost like a smile touched Daniel's lips. Could do that, after the snow melts. It was well past midnight when the last guests departed, leaving the newlyweds alone at last. Rose had long since been put to bed in her new cradle in their shared bedroom. The ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse, and even Lucia and Maria had gone to their quarters. Blake built up the fire in their bedroom, then turned to find Delilah watching him from the doorway, still in her wedding gown but with her hair loosened from its pins. "Mrs. Morgan," he said softly, crossing to her, "do you know how long I've waited to call you that?" "Since the day you offered me a seat at your table," she suggested, stepping into his embrace. "Longer than I even realized," he admitted, his fingers working at the tiny buttons down her back. "I think I was waiting for you before I ever knew you existed." Later, as they lay entwined beneath the quilts, the winter wind singing around the eaves of their home, Delilah rested her head on Blake's chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. "Happy?" he asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Completely," she assured him. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I have everything I could ever want right here, you Rose, our home. And 20 acres with a good spring," she reminded him with a smile. He chuckled. "That too. Your father might come around yet." "He's trying in his way." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at her husband's face. "Thank you for giving him the chance. He's family now," Blake said simply. "Just like you and Rose are mine." As spring returned to Montana, bringing new life to the land, Delilah Morgan stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching Blake and 4-year-old Rose in the corral with a new foal. Rose's delighted laughter carried on the April breeze as Blake lifted her onto his shoulders for a better view. "Careful with your sister," Delilah called, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly where their second child grew stronger each day. The past 3 years had brought changes both expected and surprising. The Morgan Ranch had expanded, incorporating the 20 acres from Daniel Harper and another adjacent property Blake had purchased the previous year. Their cattle operation was thriving, and Blake had added horses to their business, developing a reputation for breeding excellent stock. Rose had blossomed under the love of both parents. Blake had legally adopted her shortly after their wedding, giving her his name and ensuring her future would be secure. She was a bright, curious child who adored her father and eagerly anticipated the arrival of her sibling. Daniel Harper had gradually become a regular visitor to the ranch, his gruff exterior softening incrementally with each visit. He never spoke directly of his past rejection of Delilah and Rose, but his actions bringing toys for his granddaughter, helping Blake build a nursery for the new baby, teaching Rose how to identify different birds spoke of his desire for reconciliation. "Look, Mama," Rose called, waving frantically from her perch on Blake's shoulders. "The baby horse likes me." "I can see that, sweetheart," Delilah called back, smiling at the picture they made her tall, handsome husband and their golden-haired daughter, both sunburned and happy. As she watched, Blake set Rose down carefully and said something that made her nod solemnly before running toward the house. "Mama," Rose called as she reached the porch. "Papa says to tell you dinner smells wonderful and he'll be in as soon as he checks on Thunder." "Thank you for delivering the message so well," Delilah replied, taking her daughter's hand. "Let's go wash up, shall we?" Inside, the ranch house had evolved with their family. What had once been a bachelor's Spartan dwelling was now a true home, filled with evidence of the life they'd built together, roses, drawings pinned to walls, books stacked on every available surface, a half-finished quilt draped over Delilah's rocking chair. As they prepared for dinner, Blake entered, bringing the sense of fresh air and horses with him. He washed quickly at the kitchen pump, then came to kiss Delilah, his hand automatically moving to rest on her rounded belly. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his eyes searching her face for signs of fatigue. "Wonderful," she assured him. "Your son has been practicing his kicking all afternoon, though." Blake grinned. "A future horse trainer, clearly, or a dancer," she countered with a smile. "Either way, he'll be perfect." Blake kissed her again, then turned to help Rose into her chair, just like his mother and sister. As they sat down to dinner, the three of them, soon to be four, Delilah looked around the table and marveled at how life could change. From desperation to contentment, from rejection to acceptance, from loneliness to love, her journey had been difficult, but had led her exactly where she was meant to be. Blake caught her gaze across the table and smiled, the same smile that had welcomed her that rainy day in the Golden Spur Saloon when he had offered a desperate woman a seat at his table, and though neither of them knew it then, a place in his heart. "I love you," she mouthed silently. "Forever," he mouthed back, his eyes full of promises kept and those yet to be made. Outside, spring rain began to fall gently on the land that would nourish their future, the ranch that was not just a business or a home, but the foundation upon which they had built their family. A family formed not by convention or expectation, but by choice, by acceptance, and by a love strong enough to overcome any obstacle. As Rose chattered happily about the new foal and Blake described his plans for the spring roundup, Delilah silently thanked whatever twist of fate had led her to Pinecrest that stormy day 4 years ago. The path had been difficult, but it had brought her here, to this table, to this family, to this man who had looked past her circumstances to see the woman she truly was. And in that moment, surrounded by the love she had once thought forever denied to her, Delilah Morgan knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged.